The planet Tarvis Prime burned in silence. Zalora stood at the edge of the ruined city, her obsidian-black war armor gleaming under the dying sun. The air smelled of scorched metal and ozone, the lingering aftermath of orbital bombardment. The wooded streets were filled with the remains of a once great civilization, shattered buildings, smoking wreckage, and graffiti scrawled by some last defiant soul before the end. It was all too familiar. Fear. It had always been the final outcome of her conquests. Worlds crumbled, leaders surrendered, and entire species whispered her name with terror long after she had left. It was the unbreakable cycle of power. But today, something was different. Her crimson eyes narrowed as she looked at the prisoners kneeling before her, refugees, diplomats, defeated soldiers. They trembled, heads bowed, waiting for their fate, all except one. A human stood among them, his hands stuffed casually into the pockets of a torn, soot-covered flight jacket. He was lean but not weak, his stance relaxed, his face streaked with dirt, yet oddly calm. And most of all, he was amused. Zalora's armored boots clanked against the ground as she walked toward him, her warlord stiffening at her approach. Execution seemed inevitable, yet the human didn't flinch. She stopped in front of him, voice sharp as a blade. "Why aren't you afraid, human?" The man tilted his head, glancing around as if making sure she was talking to him. Then he exhaled, nodding to himself. "Well, for one, I've had worse Mondays." Silence. One of her warlords, a massive brute covered in cybernetic armor, growled in anger. "He mocks you, Supreme One. Shall I tear him apart?" The human raised a hand. "Whoa, big guy, let's not be hasty. You look like you work out, and I have exactly zero interest in becoming a smear on your resume." Zalora's eye twitched. "You stand before the supreme warlord of the Zelth Dominion. You should be on your knees." The human looked down and shrugged. "I don't know. Kneeling's bad for the spine. I do yoga sometimes, but—" A pulse of energy flickered around Zalora's gauntlet, crackling with violet light. It was not a warning. It was instinct, the reaction of someone who had never been challenged. Every sentient being in the galaxy feared her. Except this one. The human just sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, I get it. You've got the whole galactic doom empress thing going on. Very intimidating, solid 10 out of 10. But honestly," he shrugged, "fear's kind of overrated." A warlord stepped forward, fury in his stance. "You do not understand your place, human." The man scratched his chin. Let's see. I'm standing in a pile of rubble, surrounded by terrifying warlords, in front of an evil overlady who can probably atomize me with a frown." He nodded. "Yeah, I think I've got a pretty good grasp of my place." Zalora's gauntlet clenched. Something about him bothered her. Not his defiance, not his humor. It was something deeper. Something she hadn't felt in centuries. Curiosity. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "What is your name, human?" He gave her a lazy two-fingered salute. "Captain Elias Vance. Pleasure to meet you." Zalora studied him for a moment, then said, "You are either the bravest or the most foolish creature I have ever encountered, Captain Elias Vance." He smirked. Why not both? A ripple of disbelief passed through her warlords. There were rules to these moments. Fear, pleading, submission. No one laughed at the Supreme One and lived. And yet, for the first time in a long, long time, she hesitated. take.
"Him to the flagship," she ordered at last. "I will deal with him personally." A stunned silence fell over the warlords. No one dared question her. Vance, however, whistled. "Personally? Normally I'd appreciate a lady taking an interest in me, but I get the feeling this is going to be a bad news kind of situation." Zalora turned sharply, her cape billowing.
Behind her, as she strode toward her ship. She ignored the strange feeling curling at the edges of her mind. Curiosity was dangerous. The Doombringer was not a ship. It was a statement, a war machine spanning over 20 kilometers in length. Its hull gleamed obsidian black against the void. It bristled with ion cannons, planet crackers, and enough firepower to make a sun reconsider its career choices. It was a moving monument to terror, a place where prisoners disappeared into cold metal corridors and were never seen again. And yet Captain Elias Vance was whistling. He strolled down the warship's halls, hands still bound in advanced alien cuffs, yet moving with the ease of a man on vacation. "Wow," he muttered, eyeing the dark red circuitry pulsing along the walls. "You know, I gotta say, the whole evil
Overlord aesthetic? Top tier. Brooding corridors, creepy lighting, absolutely zero safety railings. Classic." A towering Zelth warrior beside him growled. "You mock the Supreme One's domain, human?" Vance raised an eyebrow.
No, just saying. You guys could throw in some plants, maybe some nice music. The constant hum of impending doom is great and all, but have you considered jazz?" The warrior's jaw clenched. "You are insufferable," Vance beamed. "Thank you. That's the nicest thing anyone said to me all day." The general growled but said nothing, leading him deeper into the ship. They passed through the detention level, a vast chamber filled with prisoners from 100 conquered worlds, all sitting in silent despair. That silence broke the moment.
Vance entered. "Hey, look!" a reptilian prisoner muttered, nudging his cellmate. "It's that human, the one who laughed at the Supreme One." "No way," another whispered. "No one laughs at her and lives."
Vance waved. "Hey, fellas, nice place. I see they also forgot to add plants in here." No one laughed. Tough crowd. Before he could make any more observations about the soul-crushing monotony of galactic prison design, General Korak shoved him into an empty containment cell. The energy field activated with a sharp zet, locking him in. "You will wait," Korak growled. "The Supreme One will decide how to dispose of you." Vance shrugged. "Neat. Hope she doesn't keep me waiting for dinner. I get real cranky when I don't eat. Bad for morale." Korak stormed off, Ernst sighed, stretched his arms and got comfortable. Then he noticed something. A small black probe hovered outside his cell, blinking with purple light. An AI surveillance unit. Vance leaned forward, tilting his head. "Well, aren't you just adorable?" The probe beeped. Vance grinned. "I'm going to call you Beep Boop." The probe vibrated angrily. "Oh, this was going to be fun." Vance stretched his arms behind his head, settling into his prison cell like it was a cheap motel room. He had been in worse places, much worse, but this one had a certain charm, mostly because of Beep Boop. The little AI probe hovered outside his containment field, its mechanical eye blinking with deep purple light as it analyzed him. It was programmed for surveillance, designed to observe prisoners and report any anomalies. Right now, Elias Vance was the biggest anomaly in the galaxy. He smirked. "So, Beep Boop, how's your day been? Done any fun war crimes? Or is it just the usual creepy, soul-crushing surveillance?" The probe buzzed in mild irritation. My function is to monitor detainees. Your status remains unchanged. Vance leaned back. Yeah, I figured. Then he nodded toward the corridor. Be honest, how many people have asked about me? The probe hesitated. Vance grinned. Oh, that means at least 3. Beep Boop emitted a soft beep, and Vance was right. Something was happening on this ship. He had been here for only a few hours, but already the cracks were starting to show. The guards had lingered a little too long outside his cell. Engineers on the lower decks had paused their work when they thought no one was looking. Even the officers, hardened warriors trained to follow Zalora's rule without question, had been overheard whispering about him, not about his threat level, not about his interrogation, but about his jokes. Did you hear what the human said? He called the warship cartoonishly evil. Why don't we have safety railings? These were small things, meaningless in the grand scheme of war and conquest, but war and conquest were built on obedience, and obedience cracked when people started to question. Zalora sat in her command chamber, staring at the holographic reports in front of her. She was supposed to be planning her next campaign, preparing for war, tightening the grip of her empire. But she wasn't. She was thinking about him, the human, the one who should be begging for
mercy right now, the one who should be broken, afraid, silent, and yet
he wasn't. Zalora exhaled slowly, her fingers tapping against the armrest of her throne. She had executed kings for less than what he had said. She had destroyed entire planets for mere insolence, and yet Elias Vance was still alive. She had watched the surveillance feeds. He had been locked away for 3 days. He should have been growing desperate. Instead, he was getting comfortable. And worse, so was her crew. She had overheard hushed conversations among her officers. A soldier in the lower decks had repeated one of his jokes, a mocking remark about the ship's lack of safety railings. Another had half-seriously asked, "Why don't we have plants in the hallways?" Zalora clenched her jaw. It was happening. A fracture, a shift, a tiny whisper of doubt, and whispers could grow into something far more dangerous. Her grip tightened. This
had to end. The doors to Vance's cell unlocked. Vance barely lifted his head.
He had been expecting her. When Zalora stepped into the room, her cape swept across the floor, and the energy field behind her hummed with menace. "You are disrupting my ship," she said, voice like sharpened steel. Vance grinned. "Oh, come on, that's
an exaggeration. At most, I'm a mild inconvenience, like a vending machine that eats your credits." Zalora's eyes flashed. "You joke, but you fail to see the weight of your actions." She gestured, and Beep Boop floated forward, projecting a data feed in midair. The evidence was right there. Hushed conversations, guards on patrol talking, engineers on the lower decks pausing their work. Her crew was listening to him. Vance let out a low whistle. I mean, I knew I was charming, but this is impressive." She did not smile. Instead, she took another step forward, her gaze sharp. "You are beginning to undo centuries of structure." Vance leaned back against the wall. "I mean, maybe your structure wasn't as solid as you thought." Zalora stiffened. That struck deeper than she liked. She had spent lifetimes cultivating fear. Fear kept her empire in check, and yet this one human, this ridiculous, insubordinate creature, was unraveling it with jokes. She took a slow breath. "Tell me,"
she said at last. What do you want, human? Vance blinked. Huh? You mock my rule. You refuse to break. You inspire disorder without lifting a single weapon. Her crimson eyes locked onto his. What is your goal? Vance was quiet for a moment. Then he grinned. I don't know. Maybe I just think you could be something more. Zalora froze. Something cold settled in her chest, something she had not felt in centuries. Not fear, doubt, and for the first time in her long, merciless reign, she had no idea what to do next. The command deck of the Doombringer was silent. Not the disciplined silence of a well-run warship, but something else, something unnatural. Her highest-ranking warlord stood in formation, waiting for her orders. Zalora stared at the massive holographic war map where a single red dot blinked aggressively. A rebellion had sparked in the Tarasi sector. Normally she would crush it without hesitation. She had done it 1,000 times before, but now she could feel Vance watching her. Let me guess, his voice cut through the silence. You're about to send the fleet, bomb the hell out of them, and make an example of some poor bastards who just want to live free. Standard.
Evil overlord move, right?
She didn't respond, because that was exactly what she had planned to do. Vance leaned against the nearest console, arms crossed. You know that works until it doesn't. Fear's a hell of a motivator, but it's also a terrible long-term strategy. Her crimson eyes narrowed. You believe you know better than me? He shrugged. I don't know. But I know this. If fear actually worked, you wouldn't be standing here, doubting yourself right now. A deadly silence fell over the bridge. The warlord stiffened. Zalora could feel the weight of the moment. Finally, she turned to her fleet commander. Hold position. The entire deck froze. Korak, standing rigid at her side, twitched. Supreme One, Zalora exhaled slowly. I said, hold position. For the first time in her reign, her fleet would not strike first, and it was because of a single human, Elias Vance. The galaxy didn't know what to do with peace. The Tarasi rebellion had expected annihilation. They had prepared for a final stand, believing their deaths would serve as a symbol for future resistance. Instead, they were met with silence. No warships, no orbital bombardments, and then a single transmission from the Supreme One herself.
I will not destroy you. I will not rule you. The Dominion is changing. If you wish to fight, fight. But you will no longer be fighting against me. It was the moment that shattered everything. It was unthinkable. It was impossible. And yet it happened. The Zelth Dominion, the empire built on fear.
The unbreakable machine of conquest had stopped, not because of a fleet, not because of a battle, because of a single human who refused to be afraid. Elias Vance leaned back in the Supreme One's personal quarters, feet propped up on a ridiculously expensive table, sipping what he assumed was some kind of alien whiskey. Across from him, Zalora stood, arms folded, watching him with thinly veiled irritation. Just to clarify, she said slowly, this is not a permanent arrangement. Vance smirked. Oh, come on, we make a great team. He raised his glass. The reformed overlord and the handsome rogue who helped her change. Classic. She pinched the bridge
of her nose. I should have executed you when I had the chance.
Vance grinned. But you didn't. She exhaled sharply. No, She hadn't, because somehow this ridiculous, infuriating human had done the impossible. He had changed her. She had built an empire on fear, believing it was the only way, and yet Vance had walked into her warship, cracked a few jokes, and made her question everything. She still didn't fully understand him. But maybe, just maybe, that was okay. Word spread quickly, the Supreme One no longer ruled by fear. The Doombringer, once a symbol of death and terror, became something else entirely. It was still the most powerful warship in the galaxy. But now it protected instead of conquered. And Elias Vance, well, his legend only grew. Some called him a fool, a reckless anomaly that got lucky. Others called him a revolutionary, the man who laughed in the face of fear and won. Vance himself? He just called it a Tuesday as the ship drifted toward a new, uncertain future. Zalora glanced at him. "You will be insufferable about this, won't you?" Vance grinned. "Oh, absolutely, and for the first time in centuries." The Supreme One smiled.